آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
لقد جاءكم رسول من أنفسكم عزيز عليه ما عنتم حريص عليكم بالمؤمنين رؤوف رحيم. فإن تولوا فقل حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم.
الله أكبر، 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 لا إله إلا الله هو الله أكبر، الله أكبر ولله الحمد. الحمد لله، الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على عبدك ورسولك محمد وعلى آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اتقوا الله، اتقوا الله، اتقوا الله رحمكم الله، إن الله هو الغفور الرحيم. فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه العزيز والفرقان المجيد: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان. In the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, most beneficent, most the dispenser of grace. We thank and praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for having guided us to this day of Yawm al-Eid. We realize and submit that without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance, we might not have been guided. My dear brothers and sisters, this day of Eid is defined by acknowledging our life lived within Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's majesty and sovereignty, of living our lives within Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mulk. Ramadan brought us into Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine grace and generosity. And today we proclaim Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's omniscient presence in our life. Allahu Akbar wa lillahi alhamd. In a hadith Qudsi, according to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains the orderly logic of the fast, the conceptual logic, how that logic works on us and in our body. When in the hadith Qudsi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كل عمل بني آدم له إلا الصوم فإنه لي وأنا أجزي به. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the hadith Qudsi, according to the Prophet, every good deed of the children of a child of Adam is for him, except the siyam, except fasting. It is for me, and I, Allah, shall reward the fasting person for it. What is the ordering logic supposed in this hadith Qudsi? Ibn Arabi explains this hadith as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala affording the one who fasts, the capacity to enter into Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's grace, to enter into Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine presence. How amazing. We submit therefore during this fast through our adhkar, our salah, our tarawih, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's amr, to His command, which requires of us what is called al-fana, it requires of us a process of annihilating or evacuating our nafs, our egos. Why? Because when we do that, we render ourselves, our nafs and our personas vulnerable, and it is out of that vulnerability that we're able to shed our egos and enter Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's generosity. Without this fana, without this shedding, we're unable to render ourselves vulnerable and access Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's generosity and grace. And so fasting therefore afforded us in this month with the capacity to engage our deficiencies and to align our bodies, our souls and our hearts with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine might. So my view here aligns with khutbahs, and I will be cross-referring to many of the activities that happened in this masjid over the last month, with Nasir Basir and Imam Rashid's Ramadan khutbahs, where they emphasized heart or qalb cultivation, Nasir, and the purification of the soul of the nafs, tazkiyatun nafs, yesterday by Imam Shahid Hamilton. So we are invested in Ramadan. Why? Because this presents us an opportunity to address the fear that we often have of living a heedless life. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains in Surah Taha, وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this ayah, whosoever turns away from my remembrance, verily for him shall be ma'ishatan danka, a narrow, depressed life of hardship. We enter into Ramadan to mitigate the worst consequences of the impact of what will take us into a depressed life and move us forward into a life of productivity. So Ramadan therefore has been for us an antidote to a life of ghafla, a life of heedlessness. During this month, as I've suggested, our salah, our dua, our tarawih, and nafil salah, our adhkar, remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, allowed us to reset our religious and our spiritual coordinates. Our acts of worship during Ramadan prepared us for servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the core theme of this khutbah. Such servitude is referred to in the following ayah, but was also referred to by the Khatib Jihad Umar in his Ramadan khutbah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created not the jinn and mankind except that they should worship me, Allah says in Surah Al-Mariyat. The ayah refers to ya'budun or ubudiyyah, which is a very comprehensive concept that includes all those words and deeds that Allah loves and is pleased with, both those outward deeds and the inward deeds that we are using in this month to evacuate our nafs through the process of fana. Ubudiyyah, or service to the divine, involves a personal transformation. We submit to the real enabling power in our lives. This enabling power in our lives come only from acquiring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divinity, His divine presence, divine lordship within ourselves. So therefore, fasting during Ramadan provides us with the spiritual resources to activate our ubudiyyah, our divine servitude within our being. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's servants confront their self-importance and their ego-driven existence, they therefore render themselves vulnerable. And therefore, based on such vulnerability, stripping ourselves of our ego, we become open to receiving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine grace, His mercy, and His generosity. My respected brothers and sisters, the spiritual encounter in Ramadan is also a communion with the memory of our ancestors, our deceased family, friends, and especially our parents. Our heightened consciousness tie us to our primordial origins, where we come from, what constituted us, what made us and brought us here. So we become sensitized during the month of Ramadan to how our ancestors moved across mountains and oceans and met with others in place and converged, in our case, at the southernmost tip of Africa. These convergences was made up of a mix of genes, languages, culture, and spiritual connectedness. Therefore, we came out of this mix into Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's bayan, into Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech and language. As Allah explains and as addressed so beautifully by Dr. Rafiq Khan in his Ramadan Khutbah. As Allah described beautifully in Surah Al-Rahman, Ar-Rahmanu 'allama al-Qur'an, khalaqa al-insan, 'allama al-bayan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the most beneficent Allah, establishing Allah's primordial majesty over us. Allah is Ar-Rahman, Allah is the beneficent, Allah is the most merciful. And it is because Allah is the most merciful, out of that mercy, Allah taught humankind the Quran, gave humankind out of His beneficence and mercy the Quran. He created humans, and out of His beneficence and mercy, Ar-Rahman, He taught humans eloquent speech and clear expression. Allah taught humankind the Quran and vested them with the capacity for bayan, the capacity for speech and language, to acquire language and the ability of creative expression. The point that I'm arguing is that this is an ongoing process, the acquisition of language in the relation to where we stand and what we are confronted with is an ongoing process that comes out of Allah's divine majesty and out of which we have to exercise our ability to proceed with clarity, with clear speech in the world. Our ancestors therefore, out of this Rahman, invented language, education and culture, literally invented language. What is known today as Afrikaans. Their spiritual practices informed religious and social adaptation that rooted us in the African soil. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the gift of our ancestors' bayan that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's Rahman, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's beneficence. We can also be emotional today. We salute our deceased family. We say to them salam, our partners and our friends and our parents who came to visit us during Ramadan. In our dreams vividly, in our memories and in our thoughts. In their lifetime, they transferred Allah ordained akhlaq of patience and sabr and hikmah unto us. Our departed parents were palpably with us during Ramadan, soothing and embalming us with a warm spiritual embrace. We in turn are soothed by Allah's promise of Jannah for them with this beautiful ayah. This ayah is preceded by what Allah promises those who are not truthful to His Rahman, those who are the kuffar, those who are the ingrates, those who are ungrateful. And then in this beautiful surah, Surah Al-Zumar, which by the way was recited by the Qari from Iran on Sunday evening. It just hit me because I had just been preparing my khutbah and been using this surah. And then he recited it. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَسِيقَ الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا رَبَّهُمْ إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ زُمَرًا. But those who are conscious and mindful of their sustenance during their life will be urged on zumars, will be urged on towards Jannah, towards paradise. حتى إذا جاءوها وفتحت أبوابها وقال لهم حزنتها. When they reach the Jannah, they shall find its gates wide open. Our ancestors, our parents, our deceased, and its keepers will say to them, Salamun alaykum tibtum fadkhuluha khalidin. Subhanallah. What have you done? Enter then this paradise to reside there eternally. We will visit our ancestors and our parents and those deceased graves over the next 3 days and offer our du'as for our deceased ancestors and families. Allahumma ihfir lahum warhamhum wasakkinhum fil jannah. Oh Allah, forgive and pardon them, have mercy on their souls, and accord them al-Jannah, paradise. Let us be clear that Eid, Yawm al-Eid, belongs to the children. You may make as much noise while I'm speaking today in this masjid. No one will shut you up. Eid is made special for them through gifting and good, clean and beautiful clothes. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on observing a forlorn orphan child after the Eid congregation when he had left the masjid, went to this child and told him, if you are crying, Muhammad will not celebrate the day of Eid. Muhammad offered the boy to be his new father. He took the boy by the name of Zubair bin Saghir to his home and provided him clothing and food. Such behavior underscores the Prophet's general attitude to children. He affirmed their educational, moral and spiritual development and encouraged their unfolding leadership roles. The innocent joyfulness of children was brought home, as Dr. Salih indicated, during a recent Sunday Ramadan program in this masjid. Children playing, children creating and messing and acquiring in that process etiquette. So the idea that children have to play is a wajib, and hopefully I'll explain to you why that is so now. Our children are the bearers of complex living circumstances. Their bodies are wired into technology, so are ours. The algorithm and ChatGPT 4.0 about to be launched. This is a game changer. It's one of those cataclysmic game changers for life. It's been coming for 30 years, but the algorithm, ChatGPT and so on, has now become a container for easy access, where the algorithm now conducts itself on our bodies. This requires understanding by us, the elders. There is a responsibility on the elders. It requires an understanding by parents and their teachers and their educational institutions, so that we can raise them with the capacity for them to make critical and informed choices about the use of technology, about securing relations with their peers, their families and their friends, about drawing boundaries amidst the seamlessness technology onto the body. It seems to us that in a context where entirely the definition of human is at play and it's beginning to manifest itself in our everyday practices, Islam has something to offer. The question is, we first have to understand what the challenge is, and often we don't. And then we must mine the Islamic intellectual legacy as it's laying itself out right in front of us. We are living in the internet age. The horizontalization, let me use a big word, the horizontalization of information is with us. We can all access it. We need a powerful basic literacy, and then we can access half of this khutbah was accessed via accessing the internet. But now my internet is jumping here. So I wanted to make the point about what Islam's got to offer, I think. Islam's got to offer ethical resources. Fada'il, Arabic word that we want to memorize. it's called virtues. Because virtues are now palpable in raising and educating our children. It's always been, but now it becomes very important. So for example, as I've explained in another khutbah, the virtue of hilm. Hilm is taken from one of the names of Allah, Al-Halim. Allah is most forbearing, Allah is most judicious, Allah is most discerning. This is an Allah ordained virtue that emphasizes Allah's judiciousness, and as a name of Allah works in the Tawheed, if Allah is judicious and we know Allah is judiciousness, then that virtue is available to us if we live within the ubudiyyah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what the fast and the resources of the fast allows us. We can access Allah ordained virtues such as hilm. So therefore cultivating hilm must now be put to work in raising and socializing our children. It's very, very important hadith. Rabbi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, إِنَّمَا الْعِلْمُ بِالتَّعَلُّمِ وَإِنَّمَا الْحِلْمُ بِالتَّحَلُّمِ. It is a beautiful, beautiful verse. Verily the Prophet runs knowledge and the acquisition of virtues of hilm together here. But the difference between the two must be taken notice of. The Prophet says, verily, ilm, knowledge, only comes by learning. So that's important. Moral learning. Ta'aleem, as we would say, to turn it into a verb. And the acquisition of forbearance or judiciousness or making judgments and allowing our children to understand how to use their judgments as they come into the world. How do we acquire that? Does the Prophet say? By behaving virtuously. By establishing practices of virtue. And so the implication of that is when we behave virtuously, we set the example by which others can see how we behave virtuously, concretely. And then they come into their lives, into their morality, into their ethics, by observing us. That is the responsibility. We've got to observe time, as I'll argue later. We've got to observe routines, because the problem with living in the context of the algorithm is that it doesn't respect time. Time is fundamentally reworked. That I will explain to in a second. The emphasis therefore here is on acquiring virtues to work in on our children's everyday lives. And so responding to our children cannot be placed on the back burner. Like the Prophet's example, we must enter our children's thinking and doing space to figure out how to guide them to live their life and our life in new ways of jama'ah. So the jama'ah is not the jama'ah around this masjid anymore. There is no physical jama'ah, right? And our friends do not always have friends in the street that we lived in like a generation ago, you and I had. Their friends are dispersed all across the Cape Peninsula, right? How do you establish new jama'ah with technology? So the point is here is not to argue that you must put technology in the pocket. You can't, that's impossible. That's 40 years ago, 50 years ago. How do you live your life in relation to it? And we also have to make sure that we raise our children to establish ethical livelihoods, not to simply live even on their own identities, even on their own, to use a negative word, narcissism, even on their own fears, but to develop an outward persona. That is why the Islamic tradition of sadaqah in Cape Town is so important. It's just pots of food, but beyond the pots of food which we all contributed to and made, beyond those pots of food is the connections that we make as a platform for taking further. So charity, the platform is beautiful. It's something that Muslims can offer. Other communities do it too, but we seem to do it more systematically, right? The point is to use that as a platform to move out into the world, not be trapped by a digital platform or a cell phone that pulls you in on yourself. Final few points, brothers and sisters, it's a long point that I'm going to make, is to ask the question, what is the role of the Quran in all of this? What is the role of the Quran in the life of a community during these complex, vulnerable times? How might we access the Quran as a guidance and as a criterion? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declares in the context of Ramadan in Surah Baqarah, شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى وَبَيِّنَاتٍ مِنَ الْهُدَى وَالْفُرْقَانِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that during the month of Ramadan, we recited the Quran. We beautifully recited the Arabic of the Quran. Why is that important? Because it attaches us to the emotion and to the sound of the Quran. Islam provides the resource of sama', the resource of listening and sound, as probably the closest to our emotional attachment to something. That is why do not forsake the reciting of the Quran. Try to recite nicer and better, and sometimes, as I did this morning, a little bit too fast. But then we also study the Quran, and then we engage with the Quran. Because the Quran was sent down according to this ayah as a guidance to people. The Quran was clear kindness and as a criterion between right and wrong. This masjid offered stimulating weekly Quran tafsir exegesis, Quran tafsir understanding sessions during Ramadan. It's all on the Facebook, and so you can go back to reading it. Imam Abdul Rashid of Omar presented an argument via Zoom from the United States. His argument was that you have to do an interrelated reading of the Quran. You have to do deep reading of the Quran. Intertextual reading. You have to develop a literacy that understands the Quran holistically, but also as ayah, explaining other ayah. Al-Quran bil-Quran tafsir. This is the technical word for this. But then Imam Rashid also alerted us to the contextual reading of the Quran. Is that once you have read the Quran historically and intertextually, in other words, explaining the Quran bil-Quran to itself, then you have to also do it contextually. And what that requires is that you have to understand your society. On such a view, a deep understanding of the Quran's inner meanings is applied to our changing circumstances. The Quran must thus be brought into conversation with significant changes such as digital disruption, planetary transitions, planetary sustainability, and living life amid load shedding. So we've prepared to be here today in the midst of load shedding level, I don't know what, 8.6. It's been a particular kind of challenge. So the issue is not to be fooled by a sense of judiciousness about how we need to live passively in this world. Judiciousness means how do we adapt as a community, and yet how do we keep a critical edge. Another Zoom tafsir contributor, Ibrahim Musa, alerted us to time as a long and multi-dimensional duration. So the West, the Enlightenment West in the 18th century, 19th century, introduced time as clock time. Right? Colonial time, as introduced, you move from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock, and that's 2 hours. And you move forward in time, and you will acquire your modern becoming once you've moved from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock. And what you have had to encounter, the oppression, the violence, the degradation from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock, doesn't matter. All that matters to a Western modern conception of time is that you're moving forward and serving the colonial project. The suggestion here is that time in the Quranic context is something different. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks a question. Was there a period of time, a dahr, when the human being was not even worthy of a mention? This is in a surah that is called Dahr time or Insan. So in this ayah, in this surah, Allah asks, was there a time when humans were being considered unworthy? First ayah in this surah. So this is a very uncanny ayah. It's a rhetorical question that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises. It suggests that humans have to consider themselves not being too serious within the long cosmological duration of the universe. The ayah suggests the smallness or insignificance of humans in this universe. As Ibrahim Musa semi-seriously suggested, an afterthought. Makes us modest. But this ayah also says further on that we will be tested severely. So time or dahr is worthy of deep scrutiny. It seems we have to account for our existence amid these complex dynamics of living in a time, space, specific place and so on. We have to understand that that is the key to unlocking the Quran. That requires deep duration, complex duration, psychic dimensions, psychological dimensions, affective embodied dimensions, intellectual dimensions. We have to be able to account for all of these as a way of reading the Quran. My dear brothers and sisters, one such what I call a personal time methodology was provided in a khutbah by Ibrahim Rasool, who's sitting at the back. He spoke in a Ramadan khutbah his experience with the Quran during his detention and solitary confinement in the 1980s. What emerged for Ibrahim Rasool via his memorization of the Quran, which was the only book and the translation of it, Yusuf Ali Quran, that he had in prison with him, was to memorize portions of the Quran and to study the English translation and to make annotated notes in the margins of the Yusuf Ali translation in prison. But this was an example of the detainee mufassir. Let me coin a phrase. The detainee exeget, inventing their Islamic ethical persona in the context of resisting the apartheid state. And so there are many examples of people who did this for that particular time. So I want to suggest to you, that is how you bring context, personal life circumstances, ethical commitments, and your role that you work out for yourself, drawing from the Quran and your ethical tradition, and you establish yourself. And now you have to establish it in the dahr of the times, in new times. We do not live in the 1980s anymore. When you look at hindsight at the 1980s, much more simpler time. Today we live in much more complicated. But the methodology stands. The way of understanding how to move and how to think in the world stands. We must imagine how reading the Quran can give power to the masakin, the most vulnerable in society. Women, mothers, girl children are experiencing especially vulnerability. Violence against women has been exacerbated under conditions of institutional collapse. You just have to look in the right place for the statistics. Household gender-based violence has increased. We have to account for that. As a society, we have to overturn that. Males have to play and educate their bodies in order to overturn behavior that contributes to that. Yet, under duress, as women are, they are the family's maintenance and protectors of society. They have always been, in my estimation, particularly in this community. The men have always somehow, been males. Women have always spanned the gaps. In other words, context that we live in, it seems that women are the 21st century's Qawwamun. They are the 21st century's providers and protectors. Toxic masculinity has either absconded from the scene or plays a destructive role in our households. So in this context, we must ask how our Quran tafsir readings and Islamic discourses and practice should empower women and the other most vulnerable people in our society in the same way that the Prophet Muhammad favored women and the marginalized, vulnerable in our society. Read the Islamic history, read the Quranic, the prophetic history, read especially his dealings with the empowerment of women in the Medinan period, of according them individual rights, according to vulnerable individual rights and dignified lives. And so this Eid Khutbah calls for a vulnerability-informed reading of our Quranic ethics. That's what we're putting on the table. We're not putting fiqh on the table, we live by our fiqh. But we're putting on the table the deeper, ennobling values of Islam on the table, and that is the ethical values by which all of us can recognize ourselves as being better. At least we can recognize ourselves. If we can't, then we need to ask questions about ourselves. So our Islamic discourses and practices must be adjusted and tailored. The Muslim response, to return to the theme of the Quran, must be founded on an ethics of ubudiyyah that was activated during Ramadan As we access and enter our fana, our self-annihilation, and as we access and enter Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine lordship. Out of that divine lordship, we serve Allah, and out of serving Allah, we serve society. And so a responsive ethics must confront also the devastation meted out to the Palestinians by the ever-evolving barbarism of the Zionist occupation. We must also confront the other imperial machinations in the world theaters. An ethical response requires those kinds of commitments. And closer to home, Muslims and other groups must be encouraged to form intergroup alliances, to confront the state's utter failure, and for us to become part of the politics of pleasure and lobbying and interest formation, to get the state to reform itself, to get governance to improve, to get our institutions to improve, and for us to exercise our hilm, to work out how we live a life of critique and a life of contributing to institutional and daily life improvement. That is the balance that we have to strike. We have to do both. It's a both and. That is the hilm that we have to encounter. And crucially, we must develop a virtuous approach to supporting our children in living their lives amongst the compulsion of digital technology and artificial intelligence. My dear brothers and sisters, in conclusion, our ubudiyyah service to Allah, cultivated as a profoundly spiritual and ethical response during the Ramadan, must work to tie our personal transformation to fulsome ethical expression in serving society. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم والحمد لله. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. And I'm going to stop myself and read the seventh Takbirah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, walillahi alhamd. Alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlil fala hadiya lahu wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa nashhadu anna sayyidina wa nabiyyana Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam sallallahu alayhi wa itba'ihi wa sallim. Man yuti'i Allah wa rasulahu faqad rashad wa man ya'sihima faqad dhalla wa ghawa. أما بعد، فيقول الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه العزيز والفرقان المجيد: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على سيدنا إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على سيدنا إبراهيم وعلى آل سيدنا إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. وارض اللهم عن خلفائه الأربعة أبي بكر وعمر وعثمان ورضي الله تعالى وكرم الله عليهم أجمعين. الدعاء: اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين، اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين، اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. عباد الله رحمكم الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون. Baik, selamat Lebaran Aid Said.